So that's me. Thanks a lot. So I'll pass over to Kit.
Right, thank you.
And there you are.
Okay.
Go on to that.
When I do this. Great. Okay. My name is Kit Monkman. I'm from a company called KMA, and the company is actually only two of us. My other half sitting in Leeds at the moment, working on a deadline, and we had an unusual sort of history as a company, which what I'm about to talk about relates to very directly. So I thought for the 10-15 minutes I'd just keep it's very kind of anecdotal. It is just a story, but I'm sure there are themes within the story that we can pick out, and certainly things that relate quite closely, I think, to what you've just heard. My premise behind this story was that successful collaboration can provide a method for perfectly balancing creative freedom and structural constraint. Okay, so first of all, what do I mean by collaboration? In my terms, for now, I'm talking about a specific form of collaboration, and that's collaborating with people who work in a different field to oneself. That for me, I mean, obviously there are many other forms of collaboration. That is not the definition of collaboration, but that's the definition I'm using for now. My field has always been digital technology in one form or another. Nowadays, my colleague and I work almost exclusively within sort of digital arts, really across three main areas. They're all to do with the body and performance. One is in film and television. We do quite a lot of visual effects work. Again, nearly always using actors and building environments around them. TV and commercials and stuff like that. The middle area that we work in a lot is public installations, using live technologies. So we use a lot of thermal imaging and other sort of live technologies to make kinetic environments that tend to happen in the evenings, in the dark. We did a piece in Trafalgar Square recently, which was a virtual Swan Lake. And the idea was that Trafalgar Square was dark and you couldn't see anything. And then it didn't work in this way, of course, because Trafalgar Square, we should have seen it coming, really. It was rather too busy, so it was always full of people and full of light. But the idea was that you walk in and the spotlight follows you around the space, and a little dancer appears in the spotlight, and ideally you follow the dancer around and see them move. And in doing so, create this kind of corps de ballet of pedestrians. So there's a kind of whole area that we're working in there. And then the third area, which is the area I'm going to talk about for this particular presentation, is sort of traditional theatre. When I say traditional theatre, I mean using theatres with proscenium arches for theatre spaces, but using new technologies to basically sort of build sets, kinetic sets that actually move rather than just sit still. I'll just go and explain a little of my own background. As a child, my great passion was, one of my great passions was Pollock theatres. I don't know if any of you remember them, but kind of Victorian toy theatres. And I think what it was that I always loved about them was the combination of technology and design and storytelling. And so there was always that sense of, you built the stage and you cut out all the characters, and there was something I found very kind of exciting about that. And I then grew up and went off to university and found myself using, and this is sadly a long time ago, but using a lot of kind of very early computers to write music. And when I was at university, made what at the time we called a multimedia ballet, which was a kind of early MIDI music piece with live dance and slide projections. And the slides were all synchronized to the music track. It was very clunky and probably looks very old now, but fun at the time. And then as technology began to develop, I started a little company because I just got very excited. I mean, I felt that somehow the CD-ROMs and that kind of early interactive stuff was the kind of digital equivalent of the Pollock Theatre. And I started a little company, and it grew quite quickly, and we started doing bigger and bigger projects. And ended up doing, I mean, very, what now I would consider kind of traditional things. We were doing, we did Channel 4's intranet, and we were doing kind of big websites for the Arts Council and things like that. And it was basically web development. And as the company grew, I found myself continually finding two things about digital technology, or creative technology, whatever you want to call it. First of all, sometimes working with creative technology was too constraining. And the ways in which I found it constraining, and as I say, it's very personal, were the awful technical specifications that sort of tended to come with projects. So that you'd go in, sell a project to somebody, and then immediately really have to kind of cast that in stone in terms of a technical specification, say this is what we're going to do. And then there was an awfully long process of actually making the thing happen after that, in which you couldn't then react immediately and quickly to new ideas, because they weren't in the technical specification. The other thing that I found increasingly as we began to work in performance areas was quite how cumbersome digital technology can be. You go into a dance rehearsal room, and somebody says, "Well, let's try standing on our heads," and everybody elegantly and beautifully stands on their heads and moves their legs or whatever. Somebody then turns around to us and says, "Can you make that red?" And you kind of have to say, "Well, hang on, give us 5 minutes and a bit of programming," and you come back and you kind of go, "Is that what you meant?" And so there was always that frustration with the kind of the clunkiness and the slowness of it. On the other hand, completely the other side, I always found that working with creative technology is in many ways too fluid, that you've kind of got that problem that, in a sense, if you're working in Photoshop or anything like that, the paint never dries. And I know anybody who's ever mixed a music track on a computer or played around with Photoshop probably knows what I mean. But you find yourself just tweaking and sitting there and kind of constantly going, ooh, ooh. And I'm started to get myself into the process of actually just going out for a walk, because I think one of the problems with computing sometimes, or sitting in front of a computer working, is that actually the thought process gets subsumed by the ability to make immediate changes. And actually the great thing about going out for a walk is you can't change anything, you just have to think. And you come back and you tend to know what you should do. But I've always found that very difficult, and I'll come back to in a minute. And then my other problem with the fluidity of creative technology, particularly with the kind of jobs that we used to work on, was that the deadline was always movable. That you'd be making something, and it wasn't always movable, but there could always be a version 1.1 or 1.2. So you always had that sense that you kind of never quite finished anything. It was always a work in progress.